Hey, Sandy, thanks so much for sending this research over.
Yeah.
Um, it's seriously fascinating stuff. So get ready, everyone. We're about to take a deep dive into the world of cannabis seedling microbiomes. We've got this research article here. It's titled, Soil and Seed Both Influence Bacterial Diversity in the Microbiome of the Cannabis sativa Seedling Endosphere. And we've also got some articles about living soil for cannabis cultivation. We'll definitely get to that a little bit later. You know, when we think about growing cannabis, we often focus on the soil, right? The stuff the plant grows in. But have you ever thought about what's going on inside those tiny seedlings? What's happening at the microscopic level? Turns out, they're not just blank slates, those seedlings. They're actually packed with bacteria. And the seeds themselves play a much bigger role than you might think. So, in this deep dive, we're going to uncover some pretty surprising things, like nano. What bacteria are common to all the cannabis seedlings they studied, regardless of the soil they were grown in. And we might even find a link between certain bacteria and germination success. It's going to be wild. To help us unpack all of this incredible science, we have an amazing plant science expert here with us today.
Glad to be here. It's true, those tiny microorganisms living inside plants, they're called endophytes. And they have a massive impact on plant health. We're talking influencing everything: growth, nutrient uptake, even disease resistance. It's a whole hidden world that's absolutely essential for plant health.
Okay, so endophytes. We've got these microscopic organisms living inside the plant. But what are they actually doing in there?
Well, the relationship is what's fascinating. It's not just that they're living there, it's actually a dynamic partnership. So the plant provides a home and nutrients for the endophytes. And in return, the endophytes help the plant access nutrients more effectively, boost its immune system, and even produce compounds that help fight off pests and diseases.
Wow, so it's like this microscopic team effort going on inside the plant. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Now, cannabis is a bit unique in the plant world, right? What makes it particularly interesting for this kind of research?
Cannabis is interesting because it's propagated in two very distinct ways.
Okay.
So you've got hemp varieties, which are typically grown from seed, and then you have the drug type cannabis, which is often propagated clonally, meaning they take cuttings from a mother plant to grow new plants.
Oh, wow. So like taking a branch and growing a whole new plant from it, that's pretty wild.
Exactly. And that raises some really intriguing questions about the origins of a plant's microbiome, like how much of the microbiome comes from the seed itself and how much of it is influenced by the soil it's grown in. And if you clone a plant, are you essentially cloning its microbiome too?
Those are some great questions. So this research article that we're diving into today, it really aimed to untangle these factors. Can you walk us through how they designed the study? I know they used a bunch of different variables.
Yeah, so they used three different cannabis genotypes. There was BC Big Bud, which is a drug type, and then Katani and X59, which are both hemp varieties.
Okay, so they've got different genetic backgrounds represented.
Right. And for the soil, they used two distinct sources. One was from a vineyard in the Okanagan Valley, and the other was from a hemp field. But here's the key. They sterilized some of the soil from each source to create control groups. This way, they could compare seedlings grown in soil with that naturally occurring microbiome to seedlings grown in the sterilized soil, which didn't have those microbes.
So they're trying to isolate the effects of the seed itself versus the effects of the environment it's growing in.
Exactly. And to top it all off, they used some really sophisticated DNA analysis to identify the specific bacteria present in each seedling. So it gave them a very detailed picture of those microbial communities.
Okay, so it sounds like they had a pretty thorough setup for this study.
No.
What were some of the key findings that really jumped out at you?
Well, one of the most surprising findings was that two types of bacteria, gamma proteobacteria and bacilli, were incredibly abundant in all the seedlings, even the ones that were grown in the sterilized soil. So this strongly suggests that these bacteria were actually inherited from the seeds themselves.
Hold on, so the seed's actually being preloaded with these bacteria. That's kind of mind-blowing. Does that mean that soil is less important than we thought?
It's not that soil isn't important. The study also found that the seedlings that were grown in the sterilized soil, they had significantly lower overall bacterial diversity compared to the seedlings that were grown in the non-sterilized soil.
Okay, so the soil still contributes a lot to the microbiome. It's more like the seeds are providing a foundational set of bacteria.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And to make things even more interesting, the effects of the soil sterilization, it actually varied depending on the cannabis genotype. The Katani hemp genotype, for example. It showed the most dramatic changes in its microbial community when it was grown in the sterilized soil.
So different cannabis varieties might actually have different relationships with their microbiomes. It's almost like they have individual preferences.
It seems that way. This really opens up a lot of questions about how plant genetics and those microbial communities interact. Definitely an area ripe for further exploration.
I can't wait to hear more about it. Now, we know who is living in these seedlings, but how do we figure out what they're actually doing in there?
Well, that's where a technique called metagenome functional prediction comes in. It's basically like taking a DNA blueprint and using it to predict the potential functions of the entire bacterial community.
So, not just a head count. It's about understanding what those bacteria are actually capable of doing.
Precisely.
What kind of things did they find? What are these bacteria capable of? Stay tuned, everyone, because we're going to dive into that right after a quick word from our sponsors.
Welcome back, everyone. So before the break, we were talking about how metagenome functional prediction can help us understand what those bacterial communities are up to inside the cannabis seedling.
Yeah, like we're looking at their resumes to see what skills they bring to the table.
Yeah, exactly. And the researchers found some pretty fascinating stuff. So certain metabolic pathways were more common in the seedlings that were grown in that sterilized soil, while other pathways were more abundant in the seedlings grown in the non-sterilized soil.
Okay, so the environment is definitely playing a role in shaping those bacterial skill sets. But what does that actually mean for the plants themselves? Like, how does that impact their growth and development?
Well, one pathway that really stood out was octane oxidation. And this pathway was significantly more abundant in the seedlings that were grown in the non-sterilized soil, which suggests that certain bacteria, likely from the soil, might be helping the plants break down hydrocarbons.
So those bacteria are like a built-in cleanup crew for the seedlings,
Yeah.
helping them deal with things like decaying matter in the soil or even pollutants.
It seems that way, and it really highlights how important these microbial communities are for helping plants adapt to their specific environments.
Okay, that's pretty cool. What about the seedlings that were grown in the sterilized soil? What were some of the prominent pathways in those plants?
Well, those seedlings were enriched in pathways that are involved in things like lysine biosynthesis, lactose degradation, and methionine salvage.
Okay. Um, I vaguely remember those terms from like biology class back in the day. But can you remind me why those pathways are so important for plants?
Of course. So lysine, it's an essential amino acid. It's crucial for plant growth and development. Lactose degradation. Well, that suggests that those bacteria can actually utilize sugars as an energy source, which can be really beneficial in certain conditions. And then methionine salvage. It plays a role in recycling sulfur-containing compounds, which are involved in a whole bunch of plant processes like stress response and hormone production.
So these seed-borne bacteria are like multi-talented little helpers. They're providing a whole range of benefits to the plant
Right.
right from the start.
Exactly. They're not just passive residents, they're actively contributing to the plant's health and development.
And this leads to a pretty mind-blowing thought. If we know that certain bacteria are associated with these beneficial pathways, could we actually manipulate the seed microbiome to enhance certain traits in cannabis plants?
That's a fantastic question, and it's actually an area of really active research right now. Imagine if we could select for specific bacteria that boost nutrient uptake, improve disease resistance, or even influence cannabinoid production.
That would be like a revolution in cannabis cultivation.
Exactly. It opens up so many possibilities for sustainable and targeted growing practices.
It's amazing to think about the potential. Okay,
Yes.
so we've been diving deep into the science behind these seedling microbiomes, but let's bring it back down to earth a bit. I know you brought some articles about living soil, and those offer a more hands-on perspective on all of this,
Mhm.
right? They talk about how we can actually create an ideal environment for these microbial communities to thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. Living soil is all about fostering that complex web of life in the soil. It's a really holistic approach to cultivation, and it focuses on creating a self-sustaining ecosystem where plants can truly flourish.
From what I've read, it sounds like a real art to building a good living soil mix.
It does involve a bit of finesse.
Yeah.
And a good understanding of the principles at play.
Can you walk us through some of the key ingredients and the overall philosophy behind this living soil approach?
Sure. The foundation of any good living soil is high-quality compost. It's packed with all those beneficial microorganisms and nutrients that form the basis of that thriving ecosystem.
So compost is like the bedrock of the whole operation.
Exactly. Then you want to choose a suitable grow medium, something like sphagnum peat moss or cocoa coir, to provide good drainage and aeration for the roots.
And I remember those articles also mentioned protein meals? Are those like nutrient boosters for the soil?
That's a great way to think about it. Protein meals, like kelp meal, alfalfa meal, or fishbone meal, they provide additional sources of nitrogen, phosphorus, and other essential nutrients that those soil microbes need to thrive.
So it's like giving the soil a balanced and nutritious diet to support all those beneficial microorganisms.
Precisely.
Sure.
And by feeding those soil microbes, we're ultimately feeding the plants.
This is so cool. It's like we're shifting our focus from just feeding the plants themselves to nurturing that entire ecosystem in the soil.
That's the heart of the living soil approach. It's about recognizing that plants don't exist in isolation. They're part of this complex web of life.
It's a much more holistic and sustainable way of thinking about cultivation.
Absolutely. And there's growing evidence that living soil can actually lead to higher quality cannabis with enhanced flavor and aroma.
That's exciting to hear. It seems like a win-win situation for both the plants and the growers.
It really is. But it's important to remember that living soil, it does require a bit of knowledge and attention. It's a dynamic system, so it requires ongoing observation and adjustments to maintain that delicate balance.
So it's more like nurturing a pet
Mm.
than just adding some fertilizer and calling it a day.
That's a great analogy. It's about understanding the needs of that living ecosystem and responding accordingly.
I'm starting to get really inspired to try this myself. But before I run off and start building my own living soil masterpiece, I'm curious to hear a little bit more about the potential downsides and challenges. Like, are there any drawbacks to this approach?
That's a great question. Living soil isn't a magic bullet, and it does come with its own set of considerations. One of the main challenges is that it does require a deeper understanding of soil science and microbiology. You need to be able to identify potential imbalances in the soil and make adjustments as needed.
So it's not just a set it and forget it kind of approach.
Not quite. It requires ongoing observation and a willingness to learn and adapt.
Okay, so a bit of a learning curve. But it sounds like the rewards are definitely worth it.
Yes, a healthy, thriving cannabis garden grown in living soil. It's a truly beautiful thing.
I bet. Now, you mentioned that living soil can enhance the flavor and aroma of cannabis. Can you elaborate on that a bit? How does the soil microbiome actually influence those qualities?
It all comes down to terpenes. Terpenes are those aromatic compounds that give cannabis its unique scent and flavor profiles. And research suggests that a diverse and balanced soil microbiome can actually promote terpene production in cannabis plants.
So the healthier the soil, the more flavorful and aromatic the cannabis.
Exactly. It's like the soil microbes are helping the plants express their full flavor potential.
It's amazing. It's like this hidden benefit of nurturing those microbial communities.
Absolutely. And it's one of the reasons why living soil is becoming so popular among cannabis growers who really prioritize quality and flavor.
Well, I'm definitely intrigued. After hearing all about the fascinating science behind these seedling microbiomes and the benefits of living soil, I'm feeling even more inspired to give it a try.
I encourage you to do so. It's a really rewarding and fascinating journey.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. From the microscopic world of seed-borne bacteria to the practicalities of building living soil, it's been an incredible journey of discovery.
It has, and I think the most important takeaway here is that seeds are not just blank slates. They come preloaded with this incredibly diverse community of bacteria that can significantly influence a plant's development, especially in those crucial early stages.
It's like this hidden inheritance that we're only just beginning to understand.
Exactly. And this knowledge has the potential to transform the way we approach cannabis cultivation, leading to more sustainable and efficient growing practices.
And perhaps even new and improved cannabis varieties.
Mhm.
I can't wait to see what the future holds for this field of research.
Me neither.
Yeah.
It's a really exciting time to be exploring the world of plant microbiomes.
Well, on that note, we're going to wrap things up here for part 2. But stay tuned, everyone, because when we come back, we're going to get into some practical tips on building your own living soil and explore some of the potential implications of this research for the future of cannabis cultivation. All right, so we're back and ready to get our hands dirty, well, figuratively speaking, of course. We've heard all about the wonders of living soil, but let's get practical. What are the actual steps involved in creating this thriving ecosystem at home?
It is exciting to think about putting this knowledge into action, right? Like we mentioned before, the first step is always a soil test. It's like getting a checkup for your soil so you understand what you're working with.
Okay, so we're talking pH nutrient levels, organic matter content, that kind of
Yes,
thing.
you need to know where you're starting from before you can make any informed decisions about what to add or adjust.
So that makes sense.
All right.
So we've got our soil test results. What's next?
Next comes the heart and soul of any good living soil mix. High-quality compost. Look for compost that's rich in diverse organic matter. Things like food scraps, yard waste manure, that kind of stuff.
I've actually been meaning to start composting at home. It seems like such a great way to reduce waste and create something beneficial for the garden.
It is, and there's just something so satisfying about closing that loop, turning your kitchen scraps into this nutrient-rich gold for your plants.
Yeah, I can imagine. Okay, so compost is step one. What about the actual growing medium? Those articles mentioned sphagnum, peat moss, and coco coir.
Right. Those are both excellent choices for living soil, each with their own pros and cons. So sphagnum peat moss, it's like a classic option. It holds moisture really well, and it has a slightly acidic pH, which cannabis absolutely loves. But it's important to think about the sustainability aspect. Peat bogs are very delicate ecosystems, and harvesting peat can be pretty environmentally damaging.
So coco coir is the more sustainable option then.
Exactly. It's a byproduct of coconut processing, so it's a renewable resource. And it also has fantastic water retention and drainage properties, which makes it a great choice for living soil.
Okay, so we've got compost and our grow medium.
Yeah.
What about those protein meals we were talking about before? Where do those fit in?
Think of protein meals as like an extra boost for your living soil. They provide additional sources of nitrogen, phosphorus, and a bunch of other essential nutrients that those soil microbes need to thrive.
It's like adding supplements to their diet.
Exactly. Some popular options include kelp meal, alfalfa meal, fish bone meal, blood meal.
This is starting to sound like a delicious recipe. But how do we actually know how much of each ingredient to use? Is there a specific formula?
Well, that's where the art of living soil comes in. There's no one-size-fits-all recipe, because the ideal mix really depends on your soil test results. The specific cannabis strain you're growing, even your local climate can play a role.
So it's about observation experimentation, getting to know your soil and your plants.
Exactly. You need to develop a feel for what your plants need and adjust your approach accordingly.
That's both exciting and a little daunting, but I guess that's part of the fun of gardening, right?
Absolutely. It's a constant learning process, and that's what keeps it interesting. And remember, you're not alone in this journey. There are tons of resources available online and in books to guide you along the way.
That's reassuring. Okay, so before we wrap up, any final words of wisdom for our listeners, those who are eager to embark on their living soil adventures?
Don't be afraid to experiment. Get your hands dirty, learn from your mistakes, and most importantly, enjoy the process. Growing cannabis in living soil is a truly rewarding experience. It's a way to connect with nature, nurture life, and ultimately produce some really amazing cannabis.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much and gained a whole new appreciation for the hidden world of cannabis seedling microbiomes and the power of living soil. So a huge thank you to you for sharing your expertise with us, and to Iceni for inspiring this fascinating exploration.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure.
And to all of you listening out there, we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive as much as we have. If you're as fascinated by the world of cannabis and cultivation as we are, be sure to hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share it with your friends. Your support means the world to us. It helps us grow and bring you more deep dives just like this one. Until next time, keep those minds curious, those gardens thriving. And remember, every seed holds a universe of possibilities.